My name is Imara Solis. I'm 32 years old. And the evening my sister stood up from her chair before I had even pulled mine out was when I finally understood that some people have been rehearsing a version of you that has nothing to do with who you actually are. She had the number before I arrived. I found out later that my mother had seen a deposit notification on an old shared account I had forgotten to close, a routing ghost, a holdover from the years when I was 24 and still letting my parents see my finances because I didn't know yet that visibility was the same as availability. The notification had shown the bonus clearing, $18,000. My sister, Dara, had been waiting with it. That's enough to clear the family debt, she said. You don't need all of it. My mother nodded from across the table. We all sacrifice for you to get where you are. My father said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, carefully, the way he said things he had already decided. You've changed. And not for the better. I looked at each of them in the order they had spoken. Then I pulled out my chair and sat down. I did not answer. I served myself from the dish nearest to me. I ate. I helped clear the table at the end of the meal, the way I always did. I drove home on the interstate with the windows up and the air on and the radio off, and I did not call anyone and I did not transfer anything. What none of them knew, what I had kept in the careful separate compartment I had built for my professional life over the previous 4 years, was that the $18,000 was not a bonus in the sense they were imagining. It was a discretionary performance payment attached to a role that did not appear on any public directory, that I had not mentioned at any family dinner, and that came with a title my mother would not have recognized and my sister would not have believed. She was going to call my employer in 2 weeks. I did not know that yet. But the call was going to go a way she did not expect, and I was not going to have to arrange it. Let me tell you who my family is and who I had learned to be inside it, because neither of those things is simple. My parents, Constance and Walter Solis, immigrated from separate countries, my mother from the Philippines, my father from Mexico, and met in the mid-sized Pacific Coast city where I grew up, a place defined by its port and its fog, and its particular mixture of communities that had been there long enough to develop their own gravitational pull. They had built something real, a house they owned outright by the time I was in high school, a neighborhood they were known in, a set of relationships and obligations and reciprocities that constituted a life. I do not take any of that lightly. What they built required more than I will probably ever fully understand. Dara is 3 years older than me. She has my mother's practicality and my father's stubbornness, and a set of assumptions about how the world works that she formed early and has not significantly revised. She is not a bad person. She is a person who decided at some point that the family's resources were a shared pool and that her proximity to my parents, she lives 12 minutes from the family house, I live 40, gave her both more claim on the pool and more authority over how it was managed. This is a structural position, not a character flaw, though it produces similar results. I grew up understanding that I was the one who left. Not geographically at first, but cognitively. I was the one who read differently, thought differently, asked questions at the dinner table that my father answered carefully, and my mother answered with a look that meant she was filing the question for later. I was not the difficult child. I was the one who couldn't quite be predicted, which in a family built on a certain kind of order was its own form of difficulty. I studied economics and data analysis at the university in the northern part of the state, the one with the fog that came in off the ocean every evening and cleared by 10 in the morning. I graduated at 22 with a 3.91 GPA and 2 job offers and a specific understanding of how information moved through organizations, which turned out to be more valuable than I had understood when I was learning it. I took the offer that paid less and had more to teach me, a junior analyst position at a regional financial services firm called Casterly Group, because the person who interviewed me, a director named Filippo Rose, had answered my questions about growth with specifics rather than generalities, which I had learned to treat as a reliable signal. I did not tell my family much about work. The early version of this was practical. I was new, and there wasn't much to tell. The later version was something I had arrived at more deliberately after a family dinner in my second year, when I had mentioned a project I was proud of, and my mother had asked, with genuine curiosity, but also a kind of measuring quality I recognized, whether that meant I was making more money. I had said something vague and redirected the conversation, and afterward I had understood something I had not quite articulated before, that my family experienced my professional life not as a story about me, but as a resource map. What I earned and what I held and what might be available was information they tracked in the way you track weather, not to control it but to know when to act. I closed the old shared account 14 months after that dinner. I was 26. By then I had moved from junior analyst to a senior analyst role, and Filippo Say had recommended me for an internal posting that I did not mention to anyone in my family because the title alone would have required more explanation than I was prepared to give. The title, at the time of the family dinner with the bonus, was Director of Quantitative Risk Assessment. I had held it for 11 months. The team I managed had 7 people. The bonus, the $18,000, was a discretionary performance payment that my division head, a measured man named Kofi Asani, had approved after a regulatory review project that my team had completed ahead of schedule and without errors, which in our context was not a small thing. The bonus had cleared on a Thursday. The family dinner was Sunday. I had arrived at 6:15, the usual time, with the bottle of sparkling water my father preferred and a container of the pandan cake from the Filipino bakery near my apartment that my mother had liked since I first brought it 3 years ago. Dara had been there since 5. The number was already in the room before I walked in. What Dara did not know, what none of them knew, was the full shape of my financial life by that point. I had been contributing to a retirement account since I was 24. I had built a savings position over the preceding 6 years by maintaining a lifestyle that was comfortable but not expanded. I did not own a car that cost what my salary suggested I could afford. I did not take the vacations that my colleagues with similar salaries took. I did not tell my family what I earned, and therefore was not asked to calibrate my spending to their expectations. The $18,000 was not a windfall. It was a performance acknowledgement from an institution that had specific and measurable reasons to give it, and it was going into the same place everything else went, into a financial position I had built carefully and without consultation. I had said no at the table. Not loudly, not with explanation. I had said no, and then I had said nothing else, and I had eaten and helped clear and driven home. The following week was ordinary. I returned to work on Monday. The regulatory review that had generated the bonus had moved into an implementation phase, and my team had 2 deliverables due by end of month. I tracked both. Neither was late. I had a one-on-one with Kofi Asante on Wednesday in which he mentioned, with the deliberate understatement he used for things he considered important, that senior leadership had noticed the review's outcome and that there would likely be a conversation about the team's scope in the coming quarter. I thanked him and said I looked forward to it and meant both. My mother called on Tuesday and again on Thursday. I let both go to voicemail. Her messages said she hoped I would think about the family situation and that she wanted to talk. I did not call back that week. I was not avoiding the conversation permanently. I was letting the shape of it clarify before I entered it, which was how I approached most things that required precision. I did not know about Dara's call to Casterly Group until the following Monday, when my phone showed a calendar hold from the head of human resources, a woman named Sandra Vick, whom I knew in the professional sense of someone whose name appeared on company-wide communications and who I had met at one all-hands meeting. The subject line said, "Brief check-in, 30 minutes. I sat with that calendar hold for a moment. Then I opened my email and looked for any prior communication from Sandra Vick's office. There was one from 18 months prior, related to a team benefit enrollment question. Nothing relevant. I accepted the meeting. Sandra Vick's office was on the 14th floor, 2 floors above mine. I had been in it once for an onboarding matter years before, and it had the particular quality of a room that was used for both routine and significant things, neutral enough not to signal which kind of meeting was happening until you were already in it. She was at her desk when I arrived. She gestured to the chair across from her and closed the door herself, which told me this was not routine. "We received a call last week," she said, "from someone who identified herself as your sister." I set my bag on the floor beside the chair and waited. "She said there was a family financial dispute involving your recent performance payment and that she wanted the company to be aware." Sandra's voice was even and professional. She was watching me with the particular attention of someone who had conducted enough of these conversations to know what the useful information looked like. "I want to be clear that employee compensation is confidential and that the call did not access any information about your account. But protocol requires that I make you aware it occurred and ask if there's anything you need from HR. No, I said. Thank you for telling me. The caller also asked to speak with your direct supervisor. Did she reach him? She was directed back to this office. A brief pause. Kofi Asani is aware the call came in. He asked me to let you know that it had no bearing on anything in your employment record. I nodded. Sandra looked at me for a moment. Is there anything you want us to know about your situation? I thought about this honestly. No, I said. The situation is personal, and it's being handled. Okay, she said. I'll note that you were informed and that you indicated no action was needed from HR. She paused. Off the record, and I mean that, this kind of thing happens more than people realize. Family members who don't fully understand what their person does here sometimes think a call will accomplish something. It doesn't. It just creates a paper trail that the employee has to know about. I understand, I said. Your record here is not in question, she said. In any respect. I know, I said. And I did know, which was a different thing from needing to hear it, but I noted that she had said it. We shook hands. I took the elevator back to the 12th floor. I sat at my desk for a moment before opening anything, looking at the city visible through the east-facing window, the fog already clearing in the late morning the way it always did, the port visible in the distance with its particular geometry of cranes and containers. Then I opened my laptop and returned to the deliverables. I called Dara that evening. Not because I owed her the call, but because I was not a person who let things accumulate past the point of usefulness. She answered on the second ring. HR called you, I said. It was not a question. A pause. They said they couldn't discuss employee records. That's correct, I said. They can't. Another pause. I just wanted them to know. What did you want them to know, Dara? The question landed in the silence and sat there. I could hear her breathing. I wanted them to know that you have family obligations, she said finally. Her voice had lost the certainty it had at the dinner table. It was working to find a register and not quite locating one. That you're not some isolated person who only thinks about herself. And what did they tell you? That they couldn't discuss anything. Right, I said. Another silence. Longer. What do you actually do there? She said. The question came out differently than the ones before it, not accusatory, more like something that had been sitting under the other questions and had finally risen to the surface. I had thought on the drive home and during the hour before I called her about how to answer this. There were several versions. The narrow one, the job title and a sentence of description. The broader one, the arc of how I had gotten there and what it had required. I chose the narrow one because the broader one was mine and I was not ready to give it to her yet, and also because the narrow one was, in this moment, sufficient. I run the quantitative risk assessment division, I said. I have 7 people on my team. The bonus you mentioned was a performance payment from a regulatory project my team completed. Silence. I've had that title for almost a year, I said. I didn't tell the family because I knew how the conversation would go. How would it go? Like Sunday, I said. A long pause. That's not, she stopped. Started again. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's accurate. I could hear her making a small adjustment on her end. A shift, a breath. Not agreement. Something that wasn't quite disagreement either. The space between a position held and a position examined. Mom and Dad don't know, she said. What you do? No, I said. Are you going to tell them? Yes, I said. When I'm ready. On my terms. And the bonus is mine, I said. That's not changing. Another silence. This one had a different texture. Not hostile, not resolved. The texture of someone sitting with information that has rearranged the furniture of what they believed. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We hung up. I made dinner. I watched something on television that I could not have described an hour later. I went to bed. I told my parents on the following Sunday. Not because the timeline required it, but because I had decided, somewhere during the week, that the inaccurate version, the one where I was the capable but underemployed daughter who had inexplicably refused to share her unexpected windfall, was a version I was no longer willing to maintain. I drove to the family house in the morning, before the fog had cleared, and sat at the kitchen table with my parents and told them what I did for a living. Not the title and nothing else, the full version. Where I had started, what Filippo Ose had seen in me that I had not fully seen in myself yet, the path from junior analyst to the directorship, what the work actually involved, what it had required from me, and why I had not told them. My father listened without interrupting. He had his coffee, and he held it with both hands, and he looked at me with an expression I had seen from him before in moments that required him to revise something, a careful stillness, the kind that meant he was doing real work internally. My mother's hands, which had been moving slightly on the table, the small, unconscious motions she made when she was processing something, went still partway through. When I finished, my father set his coffee down. "Why didn't you tell us?" he said. "Because I knew it would become a resource," I said. "Something the family needed access to. And I wasn't ready for that." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not," he stopped. "We wouldn't have," he stopped again. "The Sunday with the bonus," I said. That was the pattern I was trying to avoid. He looked at his coffee. "That was Dara. And you said I'd changed," I said. "And not for the better." The silence after that one was long. My mother looked at the window. My father looked at the table. The fog was starting to thin outside, the particular way it thinned on Sunday mornings in that city, gradually from the east, the light arriving before the warmth. "I was wrong," my father said. He said it simply, without additional structure, which was how he said the things he meant most. "I know," I said. My mother reached across the table and put her hand over mine for a moment. Not to say anything, just the weight of her hand, and then she took it back. "The debt," my father said. "Tell me the actual number," I said. He told me. It was less than Dara had implied. Not because Dara had lied, but because she had assembled the number from several sources and added a buffer that she had not identified as a buffer. The actual outstanding amount was $7,400, owed on 2 accounts. "I'm not going to pay it for you," I said. "But I'll help you find a way to manage it that doesn't involve asking me for my performance payment." My mother looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I know people who do financial counseling," I said. "I'll get you a referral if you want one. Someone who can look at your actual picture and tell you what the options are." My father nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. I stayed for lunch. My mother made something she made on Sundays that I had grown up with, and that tasted the same as it always had. We talked about the neighborhood, a building going up 2 blocks away that my father had opinions about, and about a cousin's upcoming graduation, and about the fog, and when it would lift. We did not talk about the bonus or the debt or Dara's call to my employer. When I left, my father walked me to the car. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I'm proud of you." He said it the way he said the things that were hardest, briefly, looking at the street rather than at me. "I know," I said. "I've known." He nodded. I got in the car. I drove home. The financial counselor referral came from a colleague of mine at Casterly, a man named Terrence Blum, who had worked in personal financial planning before moving into institutional analysis, and who I trusted for exactly the kind of practical, unvarnished assessment my parents needed. He was not cheap, and I paid his initial consultation fee without telling my parents I had done so because some things are better as facts than as offers. Terrence met with my parents twice. After the second meeting, he called me. Not to report, but to say that they were in better shape than they'd believed, and that with some restructuring of their accounts and the identification of a balance transfer option on the higher rate debt, the $7,400 could be managed on a timeline that did not require anyone's bonus. My parents followed through. I know this because my father mentioned it on a call 2 months later, in the particular way he mentioned things he was slightly surprised to find himself relieved about. He said the counselor had been direct and useful, and that they were on a plan. I said I was glad. We talked about something else. Dara and I had 2 more conversations before things settled into a new register. The first was uncomfortable and necessary. She was not accustomed to being wrong about me in ways that were this visible, and she needed to say something about it, and the saying was awkward and incomplete, but it was an attempt, and I received it as one. The second was easier. We talked about her daughter's school situation for most of it. It was the longest conversation we'd had in 2 years that was not about money. At Casterly, the scope conversation Kofi Asani had mentioned in October happened in January. My team's charter was expanded to include oversight of a new product line's risk modeling, a substantial addition that came with a corresponding adjustment to my compensation, and a new reporting line that placed me 2 levels closer to senior leadership. Sandra Vick sent a company-wide announcement. My mother called the day the announcement went out. She had seen it, I was not certain how, but these things travel in the way that information about children always travels in families, through channels you cannot fully track. She said, "I saw the news from your company." "Yes," I said. A pause. Is that a big thing?" "Yes," I said. "It is." "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know you were." "I know," I said. Another pause. Her voice, when she continued, was different from the voice she had used at the Sunday dinner table with a bonus, different from the measuring, resource-tracking quality I had learned to recognize and protect myself against. This version was simpler. Just her, telling me something true. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said. "Thank you," I said. "I am." I closed the old shared account for the second time that spring, the one I had thought I'd closed 4 years earlier but had remained technically active as a viewing account, the ghost that had shown Dara the deposit notification. I called the bank, confirmed closure, and received the confirmation email on a Thursday afternoon in March, 6 months after the Sunday dinner. I looked at the confirmation for a moment. Then I filed it and opened the next item in my queue. The thing about the account was not the account itself. It was what the account represented. A window I had left open in a wall I had otherwise built carefully, out of necessity and self-preservation, and the particular knowledge that comes from growing up in a family that loved you and also tracked you, and that those two things could be true simultaneously. I had built the wall. I had left one window. Someone had looked through it. What happened after that? The call to HR, the Sunday morning, the conversation with Dara, the counselor, the January announcement, was not something I had planned or engineered. It was the consequence of a window being opened, and then closed, and then everything that had been true in the dark being visible in the light. I had not been waiting for the right moment to be known accurately. I had been waiting to be ready, which is different. When the moment arrived, when my sister's call to my employer created the situation that required me to explain myself to my parents, I was ready, and I walked into it with everything I had built, and I did not flinch. There is a phrase I came to somewhere in the winter after all of this, on a Sunday morning in my apartment with the fog still on the water and the coffee still hot. The version of you that other people carry is their business. The version you build is yours. My family had been carrying a version of me for years that was out of date at best and entirely wrong in the ways that mattered most. They had not updated it because I had not given them the information to update it with, which was my decision made for reasons that were real. When the update came sideways through an HR office and a Sunday kitchen table, it changed things. Not everything. Not overnight. But the version they carry now is closer to true, and that is the version they will carry forward. That is enough for me. Not because I have stopped wanting to be known by my family. Because I have understood, finally, that being known accurately is not the same as being known completely, and that the parts one keep are still mine. 7 months from that Sunday dinner. One phone call to HR that went the wrong way for the person who made it. A Sunday morning in a kitchen with fog on the windows and my father's coffee going cold while he listened. That was all it took for the record to correct itself. I didn't have to say a word more than was true. If you've ever kept your professional life separate from your family on purpose, not because you were ashamed of it, but because you knew how the information would be used, I want to ask you something specific. Was there a moment when someone outside your family said something about you that your family then had to reckon with? A colleague? A company? A document? Because that moment in Sandra Vick's office, when she told me what my sister had done and what had happened as a result, is one I think about often. Leave that in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, hit subscribe and the bell. A new story every week, and I don't want you to miss it. This has been Amara's story. Thank you for the time you spent with it.